Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our sixth
Mhm.
Civic Dialogues Thought Partner session on project-based learning. My name is, for those of you who haven't met me yet, Kimberly Rosenfeld, and I teach at Cerritos Community College. I'm joined here today by Patty Robinson, who will be introducing our speakers in a moment. Keelan Koning from 3CSN is our tech support, and Rebecca Moonstone as well as our tech support. And we have put this collaborative together with our dear colleague Jan Connell from Cerritos College, who is not with us today, but maybe she'll be joining us later. As we get ready to jump in, if you could open the URL that Rebecca has posted in the chat. And if you notice, this is a collaborative Google document. If you just scroll down to page 2, we want to get you to sign in, whether you can stay for the second hour or not. We'll primarily be using this document for the second hour when we have time to discuss some of the ideas shared. But if you at least can just get your first name in and your campus and role, we'd really appreciate it. Those of you who will be staying with us as the speakers are talking today, if you could just maybe fill in something that stood out to you or got you thinking or raised a question or concern during that presentation, you can do that in the last column here. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Patty Robinson, who will introduce our speakers today.
Hi, everyone. I think I've met most of you, but again, if this is your first time joining our series, I'm Patty Robinson. I'm Faculty Director of Civic and Community Engagement at College of the Canyons. And we are just so excited. We are in the 6th of the 7 presentations of this series. As we've said, this is our first time we've done anything like this, and we hope to create a series in the spring as well to continue the momentum that we've generated here. I'm very excited today to introduce two amazing, very special people, Dr. Rick Voss and Dr. Kris Wobbe, both of whom are from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts. And believe me, as a Californian, it took me a while to learn how to pronounce Worcester correctly. But I first had the pleasure of getting connected with these two individuals through a book, which I'm sure they are going to mention at some point today in their presentation, called Project-Based Learning in the First Year. And I came across this publication when it was first released about, I guess now it'll be 2 years, I think in January. And it talked about project-based learning at Worcester Polytechnic. And we had been trying to really revamp our service learning program at College of the Canyons and looking for something that would take service learning to the next level. And once I read this book, it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Well, lo and behold, about a few weeks later, there was a proposal that was sent out to actually submit an application to the Worcester Polytechnic Institute on Project-Based Learning. And so I did so, and we were fortunate enough to have a team go and participate at the WPI Institute, which was absolutely phenomenal. And this year, we also were able to participate in it, although it was virtual, but again, it was just a phenomenal experience. And so out of that, that's how I got to know Rick Voss and then Kris Wobbe through this interaction. So we again are very pleased to have both of them here today, and I'd like to introduce them with their formal biographies. Rick Voss is Professor of Interdisciplinary and Global Studies at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. He earned his BA and MS and PhD degrees in electrical engineering from WPI and has served on the WPI faculty since 1987. From 2006 to 2016, Rick served as WPI's Dean of Interdisciplinary and Global Studies, overseeing WPI's Interdisciplinary Research Project Requirement, the Interactive Qualifying Project, and the Global Projects Program, a worldwide network of 50 centers for more than 1,000 students and faculty per year address problems for local agencies and organizations. In 2016, he established WPI Center for Project-Based Learning, which has provided support to over 160 colleges and universities looking to enhance student learning with project experiences. His interests include experiential and global learning, faculty development, curricular reform, and institutional change. He has authored over 70 peer-reviewed or articles or invited publications and directed student research projects in 15 locations worldwide. From 2004 to 2010, he was a senior science fellow of the Association of American Colleges and Universities. In 2016, he was awarded the National Academy of Engineering Bernard M. Gordon Prize for Innovation in Engineering and Technology Education. Kris Wobbe, credentials just as impressive, is the director of WPI Center for Project-Based Learning and the director of the Great Problem Seminar Program, WPI's first-year projects program. Her teaching awards include the Missouri, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, I apologize, Prize for Innovation in Undergraduate Education, and she is co-recipient of the 2016 Bernard M. Gordon Prize for Innovation in Engineering and Technology Education, awarded by the National Academy of Engineering also. She received her BA in chemistry from St. Olaf College and her PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from Harvard University. She is the co-editor of the book that I had mentioned earlier, Project-Based Learning in the First Year, Beyond All Expectations, which is published by Stylus Publishers in a 2019 date. Other recent publications appear in Change, the magazine of higher education and diversity and democracy. And with that, I am pleased to present Kris and Rick.
Well, thank you, Patty, for that very kind introduction. Kris and I are absolutely delighted to join you all for this session in the Civic Dialogue series. And I am going to now share my screen with you all. So we live in a time, even if we go back a year, we were still living in a time of great challenges for higher education. Here are some books that have been released in the last decade that reflect a lot of the popular and social critiques of higher education. And a lot of challenges exist, relatively low public confidence in higher education compared to historical levels, relatively low levels of support from many states going to their state institutions, a lot of financial challenges as a result of some of those things, some real questions about the educational effectiveness of the work that we do, and a lot of problems related to equity and access. So probably the last thing that higher education needed, of course it's the last thing that anybody needed, was a pandemic. So here's a headline from the Chronicle back on April 10th, wondering how will the pandemic change higher education? So if we look at some headlines from more recently, we can get an idea of just how the pandemic is changing higher education. Enrollment challenges, food security for students, mental health of students, equity challenges, more access challenges, and I don't have a headline here about it, but every institution, whether or not they're operating in person or on hybrid, is taking financial hits from this. So these are incredibly challenging times for us. And in American higher education, all around the country, there are institutions that are asking themselves some very sobering questions. And one of the questions is, will our institutions survive? Which institutions are going to be able to get past these difficult times? And are there some institutions that will thrive? Are there some institutions that are going to be doing the right thing? I don't want to claim to have prescient answers to these questions, but I believe the answer to these questions is related to the answer to this question, which is how can we best serve our students? I think the institutions that are going to thrive are the institutions that are able to determine how to best serve students from the perspective of giving as many students as possible the skills and abilities that they're going to need to succeed in the future. So what are those skills and abilities that our students need? I'm about to show you some of the top findings from a study that was commissioned by the Association of American Colleges and Universities, where 360 hiring managers from top employers around the country were surveyed to determine what they thought were the most important outcomes of a college education. So I'd like to ask you, before I do the big reveal, I'm going to show you the top 7 responses. Please take just 5 or 10 seconds to think about the items that you think will be high on this list, and maybe even use the chat feature to share your thoughts with some of the other people. What do you think is going to show up on this list? All right, well, let's take a look and see. Of course, you might guess there'd be a very long wish list of attributes of the people that they're going to hire. Here are the items that came out on top: oral communication, effective teamwork, ethical judgment and decision making, application of knowledge and skills to real-world settings, independence, time management, self-motivation, initiative, critical thinking, analytical reasoning. Now, that's a wonderful list of outcomes for a college education. It's a wonderful list of attributes for somebody who is going to succeed in the economy and the workplace. But when I show this list to people in academia, very often the question that I get is, where's the content? Where is knowledge of my favorite subject? And it's not that that content isn't important, but it was judged to be less important than these items. In fact, 95% of the managers who participated in this survey judged the 7 items listed on this slide to be more important for success in the workplace than a student's major area of study. And so I think that when you think back to the question that I posed on the previous slide, which is how can we best serve our students? I think that whatever we're teaching, whatever our students are doing, we need to be weaving in as many of these success skills as possible. Now, there's a lot of research suggesting that one of the most effective ways to help students develop these types of skills is through what are called high impact practices, or sometimes evidence-based practices. This is the most recent list of the 11 high impact practices that the Association of American Colleges and Universities currently has in their master list on their website. I had the opportunity to visit College of the Canyons last January and got to meet a number of you from not just that institution, but other institutions. And I know that most of your institutions offer most of these practices, and that's a really good thing. However, if you dig into what the research says about them, there are 2 very interesting findings. The first is that while high impact practices benefit all students, they disproportionately benefit students from groups traditionally underserved by higher education. And that includes first generation, low income, and students of color. However, the research further shows that those underserved groups are the least likely to have access to these high impact practices. And so going back to these high impact practices, the question is not so much, does your institute offer some or all of these, as much as it is, what can your institution do to ensure that every single student has multiple high impact practices during their time at your institution? Because that's what the research shows really moves the needle for student success. So Kris and I are here today to talk about project-based learning as a way to promote civic engagement through high impact practices. And project-based learning is, in a sense, everywhere on this list and nowhere on it. Depending on how you design a project-based learning experience, you can encapsulate 2 or 3 or 4 of these high impact practices. What I'd like to do is give you a very simple definition of project-based learning to get your mind sort of in the same place that we are. And then I'm going to turn things over to Kris to give you some examples from early in our curriculum. So when we think about project-based learning, we think about a situation in which students are challenged to apply their knowledge to tackle some sort of authentic problem. And over the years, our institution has found that the best source of authentic problems is the greater world, in the community. Virtually every organization that exists in our city, in our surrounding area, and in other locations is constantly facing challenges that a group of motivated students can make a contribution to. Project-based almost always challenges students to learn about new topics independently. Unlike the content of many of the courses that we teach, real-world problems do not lend themselves to solution through a single discipline. Students usually have to learn about new topics, learn about new techniques, and go well outside of their previous disciplinary knowledge. Project-based learning also involves communicating effectively in different forms and with different audiences. Students may be working in teams, working with faculty, and working with community partners, and communicating among all of those groups. And finally, it involves, as my last point implies, interacting productively with others. Most project-based learning involves projects that are sufficiently interesting and complex that they're better suited to a team of students than to individual students. And because teamwork is such an important outcome for our students, that's a very nice match from an educational standpoint. So at this point, I would like to turn things over to my colleague, Kris, and she's going to tell us a little bit about some of the things that happen here at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in the first year.
Thanks, Rick. I'm going to spend my time talking about our project-based curriculum for our first year students. And I found sometimes it's helpful to talk about why we believe it's really important to do projects in the first year. Projects have long been seen as capstone, culminating events for upper class students, maybe the final synthesis of all that they've learned. But projects in the first year can serve an equally important but somewhat different purpose. So the first thing, why not start first year students off on a road to becoming those independent learners that Rick was just talking about, engaged autonomous learners? Why not start them off that way? A second thing that's really important for students, particularly now in the COVID era, we're all very concerned about students forming community with each other, right? Working on a project in a team, you can develop very strong ties among the students within the team, but also students in the whole course, because it gives them a shared sense of mission to be working on these. And in addition, working on community-based projects can also forge connections, not only for the students within the class, but from the students to the community. A third thing, projects promote satisfaction and help student retention. There are quite a few studies that show that. We all know that we feel more engaged and willing to work hard when we feel like what we're doing matters to someone. And so that giving them something that matters makes them see the value in what they're doing and helps students continue on with their education. One of the chief outcomes we've seen with our first year students, a large fraction of our students, as I'm sure is true for most students everywhere, start college with a healthy dose of imposter syndrome, and particularly perhaps those students who've been underserved in the past. Some good studies showing that white males suffer from this less, although they're not immune, than the other populations. But project-based learning is hard and it's complicated. And the students recognize that, the faculty recognize that. For them to succeed at this hard and complicated thing in something that's so clearly meaningful to them and to somebody else gives them an enormous sense of accomplishment and improves their confidence and willingness to take chances as they go further into their academic careers. And finally, we found that the project-based courses offer us great opportunities to bring other professionals from across campus into the courses and help students how these people can be useful to them as they're going through their academic career. So chief among these probably are our research and reference librarians, who help enormously with getting students capable of finding the information they need, synthesizing it, and citing it appropriately. But we also bring people in from our academic technology office who help students with how to make good presentations, how to create a beautiful poster, how to storyboard a video project. We bring in people from the Writing Center, and we now have actually on our campus, brandy new Center for Effective Teaming. And all of these resources are available to the students throughout their time here, and having the opportunity to see what they can offer so early has been really beneficial. So a little bit about our first year projects program. They're called the Great Problems Seminars. And as the title infers, they each have at their heart one of the world's big problems. They were initially designed because we wanted a course that would introduce our first year students to complex open-ended problem solving. And because all of the world's big problems are not going to be solved by any particular discipline or any single discipline, we wanted to make sure that students had opportunity to work across disciplinary boundaries. We ensure that this is the case in these courses because all of these classes are team taught with faculty paired usually so that we have a STEM expert paired with a humanist, so that we can bring really diverse perspectives on any of the problems to the classes. And then we wanted students to understand that any decisions they might make as STEM professionals, since as a Polytechnic Institute, most of our students are hoping to become STEM professionals, that the decisions that they make in their careers have impacts on people, but also that the cultures that they have been raised within, the societies that they live among, also influence the decisions that they will make as technology experts. And so that two-way street is really important. And of course, we wanted to make sure that all of our students had the opportunity to engage in a team-based project. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the project or the course structure. In the first 7 weeks, the 40 to 50 students in the class work with the two faculty to understand their great problem from a variety of perspectives. Not only do we have the disciplinary perspectives of the two instructors, but they also work to make sure that other disciplinary perspectives provide a lens onto that problem. So for instance, I taught many years in the food class, Feed the World. And as a biochemist, it was important for me to make sure that students understood the food problem is not just a calorie problem, it's a nutrition problem. So how much protein and how much calcium is just as important as the right number of calories. I've taught it with a social scientist for whom social justice issues is really important. And so her lens was access and equity. And to understand that, we had to bring in an economic lens. Who has access to food? What are the economics of growing food? It's a policy issue. How does our government tip the scales in favor of grain production over against vegetable production, so that what we have available to in the supermarket is a sum of all of those things? And finally, it's cultural and historical. Things that our students find as food, others may not, and vice versa. So you see that the different disciplinary perspectives, but also there are the perspectives of how you perceive this problem depends on who you are and where you are, the geographic differences of people in different places and their experience of that problem really matters. So in this phase, the students are doing small mini projects, maybe a week, maybe a couple of days. Some of the work is independent, some of it's in teams. The teams basically float around a lot, but all the while the students are getting a much better picture of the complexity, the depth and breadth of the problem. The second 7 weeks, they still don't understand everything, but now it's time to throw them in the deep end, and they divide into teams of 3 to 5, and each team has to work on, and they usually pick some specific instance of that big global problem that they are going to dig into discover the causes and the consequences for the particular people in that location, and then devise or create or borrow a solution that's been effective somewhere else and come up with an implementation plan. And so that's the second week. It culminates with a poster session, and you can see in the bottom left corner, there's a poster of one of the students' projects, and they also have to produce a report on their project. But to give you an idea of how we get students to this place, I'm going to give you an example from the food class that I taught. So this class was, again, no, back one, Rick. This was a week-long assignment, so not a big one, and they were in teams of 4. It was only worth about 10% of the grade for the first half of this course. Required a self-managed field trip, and we had targeted a whole bunch of learning outcomes, some of which were very disciplinary based, you know, learning more about dietary needs of people, but some were very process oriented. How do you solve a problem? How do you work in teams? So now next slide, Rick. The task given to each of these 4 teams was to go to a market, and each team was assigned a different market in the Worcester area, all within a 2-mile radius, which I consider a walkable distance, though I will say our students don't always share that view. And in that market, they were to identify the foods that they would purchase if they were going to feed a family of 4 on a $90 budget for a week. And not only did they have to identify the foods, then they had to go back and analyze the nutritional value of those foods, not only calories, but protein, fat, and carbohydrate content. They also had to look at some of the demographics of the neighborhood in which that market was, who lives there, who might shop there. On their expedition, they were supposed to take notes and about what it was like to get there, what it might be like to get there without a car, what it might be like to get back if they had to carry all of that, and do a little reflection in an e-portfolio on the process of doing the assignment, their work as a team, and what they might take away from such a thing. And you know, this is clearly a different kind of assignment for each team with different challenges. So the 2 teams that have probably the hardest time are the teams that go to the convenience store, where nutrition is a real challenge, and the team that goes to the organic market, where nutrition isn't a challenge at all, but feeding a family of 4 for $90 for a week is an extraordinary challenge. But in any case, the students they're a little uncomfortable, but this kind of an assignment really gets the students off campus, sort of looking at the Worcester community from a very specific lens that might be very different than the one that they have had in their hometown when they've gone to their market. And it got at some real awareness by the students of how different things are. I mean, one of the first questions is always, nobody shops at a convenience store. Why are you sending us to a convenience store? And then we ask them, well, first of all, we're going to say it's not true. They do. And then now you tell us why that might be true. Why would somebody do it? And it's not because they're stupid. So it's revelatory to a lot of our students. Okay, thanks, Rick. Next slide. And the second half, when the students are working on their own projects, I just wanted to give you some examples of what student teams have done in their project for this course. So one group in a power and energy class assessed the feasibility of a bioshelter for a local community garden. And that means basically a little greenhouse that doesn't require any exogenous power, so that it can stay open all year long, but without using any carbon-based fuels. Another group, then that's the one that pictured here that you can see, realized that our dining hall had leftover food that had been unserved every day, and worked with a national organization to figure out all the processes and regulations that would be necessary to get that unserved food from our dining hall to a local shelter, to people who are less food secure. that turned into a club, and as far as I know, was active up through COVID times, delivering food not only from our dining hall, but also from local area restaurants to shelters that needed it. Another group documented bird kills from collisions with the windows on our buildings and designed different treatments so that that could be reduced. And another used connection we have with a micro financer in Paraguay to develop a marketing plan for a micro entrepreneur. So those are the kinds of community opportunities that students can get involved in even as early as their first year. And these courses have big impact on our students. We did a lot of assessment, particularly early on, and more than 50% of the students who'd been through this class said that the class contributed to this long list. And if you go to the next one, Rick, I'd like to point out particularly the things in red, because those I think are the things that are probably most relevant to civic engagement and becoming effective citizens in our current world. The ability to work on complicated problems, being aware of global and contemporary issues, and being able to have controversial conversations or conversations about controversial issues is a really significant thing for first-year students to feel like they've got, if they're not comfortable, at least they've had some practice and might be more comfortable. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Rick to talk about projects that happen later on in our curriculum.
Thanks a lot, Kris. So Kris has been describing to you project opportunities that we've developed for students in the first year at WPI. And one of our primary motivations for getting students engaged in projects early is that they are all going to be expected to engage in project-based learning on a larger scale in their later years at WPI. They wind up doing projects across all 4 years, both in and out of the major, but I want to focus on one particular challenge, which is something we call the interactive qualifying project. It's done in the junior year. It's a graduation requirement that you could think of as general education because it's not related to their major. And it's 9 credits, or the equivalent of 3 courses. So it's a significant responsibility that our students have to complete in the 3rd year. And I think it's viewed by a lot of students and faculty at WPI as the signature experience of the university. It's not a course, interestingly. It's organized much more the way that graduate research is typically organized, where a small group of students conduct inquiry under the direction of 1 or more faculty members. The students do this in teams of 3 or 4, and those students come together from all the different disciplines on campus. In fact, so do the faculty. So the faculty and student expertise may or may not be directly related to the problem, but we're talking about very interdisciplinary problems, because we're talking about problems that are proposed by community organizations, by municipal government, for example, or nonprofits or NGOs. Our faculty work with those organizations to identify problems that will be of the appropriate size and scale of students to tackle. From an educational standpoint, we've got a lot that we're trying to accomplish in this project. This is probably the primary place where our students develop sophisticated research skills, which have begun when they take that first year project. This is very much a problem-solving experience. There's a lot of critical thinking involved as students consider different responses to the challenges. There's a lot of communication. There's a formal written report. There are regular formal oral presentations. Teamwork and leadership is an important element of the project. The projects are done in teams, and the faculty spend a lot of time helping students develop their teamwork skills and abilities. Ethical awareness is a very important part of this. And in a sense, it's all about contextual understanding. You heard Kris, when she was describing the first year projects, talk about the fact that we want our future engineers and scientists to think about how technical and scientific problems are embedded in a much more humanistic context. And so we want students to understand that in order to address a problem, you need to think about human needs and values. You need to be aware of social structures and policy issues, and you need to be mindful of justice and cultural norms. And that is true whether students are working in a community organization in our own city of Worcester, which Patty says really well, by the way, or on the left here, you can see some of our students working in an informal settlement community in Namibia, because our students have the option to do these projects all around the world. I want to tell you quickly about a couple of examples of these projects to give you an idea of how they play out. So AIDS Project Worcester is an organization here in our city that serves the HIV positive and AIDS clients that come to them. And one of the many challenges that that organization and that community faces is the challenge of nutrition. A lot of these people live in a food desert, they have limited income, and they have compromised health, which really makes all the more important the need for good nutrition. AIDS Project Worcester came to our students to explore the possibility of creating a community garden on the piece of land that's pictured here, which was a recovered brownfield site. Now, I think it says a lot about the approach that we take to these projects, that this was not about the students building a garden. This was about the students understanding the organization, understanding the community it serves, and recommending how the organization could sustainably build and maintain its own community garden on this site. This is a picture that I took on the same plot of land in, I think it was October of 2018 at the end of the growing season. You can see that they wound up recommending a raised bed strategy because of the brownfield's nature of the site. And this is a garden that is sustained every year by the AIDS Project Worcester staff and clientele based on the recommendations that the students made. So this is the type of work that we're trying to get our students involved with. There are elements of service, but fundamentally we want the students to bring to bear research and critical thinking skills to help make recommendations and try to address the problem. Another example, the two women that you see in the center of this photograph work for the Worcester Department of Health and Human Services. And like many cities, Worcester is the second largest city in New England. And like many gateway cities of our type, we have a lot of people in desperate need of social services and a lot of problem connecting those people with the social services for substance abuse, for mental illness, for nutrition, for permanent and temporary shelter. The four students that you see on either side of the people from the Department of Health and Human Services developed an app called Stigma Free Worcester that will run on any cell phone and provides instant access to the list of resources and contact information and hours in multiple languages for all of the social services that are available in the city of Worcester. And I checked online this morning. This project was only done about a year ago, and the app has been downloaded over 500 times. So those are a couple of examples of the projects that our students are doing, working in the community. I think it really has an impact on the students and on the faculty here that may have been hard to predict when WPI adopted a project-based curriculum 50 years ago. The faculty at that time, I think, understood that they wanted students to learn how to get things done in the real world. I think the way that we have concluded that the most powerful projects are authentic projects connecting with community organizations has really helped us to produce graduates with an awful lot of empathy and the ability to think much more broadly than their particular field or expertise. So at this point, on behalf of Kris and myself, I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us today and open the floor to any question or discussion that you'd like to take place.
And everyone who is on the Zoom, please go ahead and place your questions in the chat, and Kimberly and I will read them and allow for discussion by Kris and Rick. So Kris and Rick, it looks like we have a question from Elaine Akita, who's asking, how are you preparing students to enter the community? You described some students expressing surprise at who would buy from a convenience store. How are you dealing with diversity and racial justice issues?
That's a great question. We do talk to the students about going into the community, and the first thing we tell them is that they're representing the institution and that they need to be on their best behavior. We provide them also with a letter from me or one of the instructors to provide to the shopkeeper, because having 4 students wander around looking for, some period of time without buying anything might be a little creepy. But, they are talked to about, at that point, we've had not a whole lot of class. It's fairly early on, that ethnic market assignment. But they're aware that they're going into a different part of town. They've done their demographic research. They're told to be respectful and to keep their eyes and ears open and their mouth shut to the extent that they can. And then we process quite a bit when they come back. And that seems to work fairly well. And it helps us get into more issues of diversity and social justice. So it's a pretty good stepping stone to those questions.
Hi, thank you. And I know, just having been at the first WPI Institute, that we were there in person, and I remember going to the presentation that you did specifically on that project, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And I have to say, I was put into a group. It was funny because they had us get into groups, and as a sociologist, I was put in a group with a biologist and a chemist. So when you think about how far could we all be coming from our disciplines, looking at this topic so differently, and it was just fascinating how each of us looked at this topic from our own lens. And so things that I had never thought about, that the chemist was talking about, the biologist was talking about, things that the other 2 individuals had never thought about from a socioeconomic kind of perspective. So that's where I think this interplay is just so amazing with these kinds of projects. We have a second question. How does the demographics of the student population compare to that of the community? And I think we're probably going back to that same assignment that you were talking about, and also the other examples that you were using.
I think we're, on the whole, probably whiter and wealthier than the Worcester community at large.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the senses in which the community becomes a rich resource for us is that, as I had mentioned, some of our students are traveling halfway around the world to do community-based projects in Asia and Africa, Central and South America. But our students can have a really profound cross-cultural experience right here in Worcester. We have large populations from Ghana, from Vietnam, from Brazil, from lots of different places around the world. And a lot of the organizations that we do projects with serve those communities. And I'd like to just sort of loop back to the first question, which was such a great question about how do you prepare students to enter the community. Kris described preparing her students to go into an ethnic market or convenience store and make some observations. But when we're doing the third-year projects that I was talking about, students are going to be going into the community for an extended period of time. And in those projects, before they begin the project, they are required to take a social science course about social science research methods that is tailored to the specific location and communities that they're going to be working with. And so, for example, if students are going to be working in a culture different than theirs, they get a lot of training in understanding participatory methods and ways to have communities identify their own problems and participate in the solution of those problems. And so that it really is a great question.
We have another one, which is great. How are you doing these things during the pandemic?
Can we skip that one? So it's hard. It's hard. In the spring, we had to, like everybody else, like you, like everybody else, we sort of had to pivot midstream. And about that, you know, that was a difficult situation for everybody. In the fall, we were able to do a little bit more planning. When possible, we continue to do projects with the same community partners that we planned to work with, except we do it all via Zoom. And so our students aren't getting a hands-on experience. The projects might be a little bit more aimed at doing research and making policy recommendations than they would be helping to create some artifacts or something like that. We're hoping that this is temporary, but these projects are such an important part of our students' education that we're working really hard to make them rich research experiences that really do give them that community engagement.
They still, through technology, have the opportunities to engage with people in the community or the organization, and they're taught how to do interviews, and really it's amazing how well things have gone. I mean, because we never thought it could go this well without being there, but it does actually work pretty well through technology.
And that actually, you've answered a little bit, but maybe you can expand a little bit on this question as well, which kind of overlaps with what you were just discussing. What adaptations have you made to the projects with remote learning? And so again, now that everyone's having to either teach specifically online or with the remote component, maybe you can share a couple of examples.
You want to go, Rick?
I haven't had any firsthand experience with this because I've started a phased retirement, so I'm sort of watching this with admiration from a distance as my colleagues are tackling it. But so we've got long-term relationships with community-based organizations, both here in Worcester and in all these locations around the world, where we work with these organizations year after year. So we know them, they know us, and they're mutually beneficial relationships. And the fact that we have those relationships is allowing us to do things under duress during pandemic, mostly through Zoom. And so so a lot of the organizations that we're working with, they have a problem, and the problem is related to a lack of resources and person power. And our students devote a lot of time and attention to these projects. So very often the most valuable contribution that our students are making, whether in person or not, is doing a lot of really good comparative research about how other organizations have solved similar problems in different places around the world, and then pulling that together with their knowledge of the organization and the community it serves to come up with recommendations. They can still do that. They can most of that happens online through telephone calls and through archival research. And so an awful lot of those types of projects continue the way they were before. And we've had to pivot toward more of those research-oriented projects during this time when it's difficult for people to come together safely.
I've also heard of examples where when sometimes there's a little bit of field data that needs to be gathered, and it can be of various sorts, but in a couple instances, I've heard where the students would request that somebody in the organization on site be able to go to wherever and make the observation, take the picture, whatever is necessary. And that has proven to be an extraordinary learning experience for the person in the organization who maybe had never done anything like that before, who had no idea what that site looked like, and now had a far better understanding of what the complexity of the problem was from having actually gone and done something that otherwise the students would have done. And so some of those remote experiences have turned out to be better learning experiences for the agency as well.
I'm actually going to combine two questions here. The first is, what are the sources of funding for the students? And then we have a second question. Do you develop any projects that are specific to the discipline of a group of students?
Sure. So the projects that involve travel, obviously there are expenses associated with that. The students have traditionally paid for their own travel to remote locations where projects would take place until we did an alumni study and found out how valuable the impact of those off-campus projects was, and decided to not have the funding be an issue. So every student that matriculates to WPI now gets a financial aid. As part of their financial aid package, they get a global scholarship that will make it possible for them to participate for no additional cost in one of our off-campus project programs. So it's something, you know, we're very fortunate to be a private university with the funds to be able to do that. But quite honestly, an awful lot of those funds have come from donations from alumni who had had those same experiences and want to make sure that the next generation of students has those experiences. So WPI sends faculty along with the students. WPI pays for that, and we're simply shifting some of our instructional resources from our campus location to wherever the projects are taking place. The second question is an easy one to answer. So after our students do this 9-credit-hour interdisciplinary project in the third year, in the fourth year, they do another 9-credit-hour standalone research project. But this one is specific to the discipline of that group of students. It is called the Major Qualifying Project. And for engineering students, it's typically a design project. It might be done in a research lab, or it might be done in a local corporation. Science students typically are doing laboratory research in faculty research labs. So we do have students do projects that are a deep dive into their major, as well as the interdisciplinary types of projects that Kris and I both described today.
And then I know we had a question regarding the research that you were mentioning earlier by the Heart, not Heart Institute, but the Heart Research Study. And I know that Rebecca is looking for that link. So Randall, we'll get that to you, if not today, later when we send out more information about today's meeting. And then we have a question, and this is great. How do you grade the projects? By depth, effectiveness, impact?
So we have a faculty approved list of 10 learning outcomes for that junior year project. We provide the students with rubrics. We give them regular feedback, but most of the feedback that we give them during the course of the project is qualitative. We're trying to do a lot of formative assessment. They're constantly writing and rewriting and revising and re-revising. At the end of the project, we put a letter on it. And it's a very close collaboration between the faculty and the students. A lot of faculty input goes into the projects. And in many ways, it's similar to the way that graduate students work with their research advisors. And similar to graduate students working with their research advisors, the students are typically doing their best work and the grades are usually pretty high. So it's, you know, we try to de-emphasize the importance of the grade. That's very difficult to do with students, but we've got some, you know, and if anybody's interested, you can drop us an email, or Patty can connect you with us, and I'd be happy to send you more information than you want about the rubrics that we use and the, you know, the way that we try to articulate our expectations to the students.
I think, I don't know if you said this, Rick, but I think it's also important to emphasize, if you did say it, because I didn't hear it, we grade not only the product of their work, the report or the plan, but also the process. So, and that they're getting feedback on as well. How well they're approaching the work that they're doing, their work in a team, their work with the sponsor, their independence and ability to come up with their own ideas. All of that is also an important component.
Yeah, attitude, effort, yeah.
And let's see, it looks like we have two more, and they're somewhat related and actually connect to what's going on right now with COVID and teaching remotely. One question is, how do they negotiate the interviews? I think referring to the students with community, given the switch to Zoom. Are they recording?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think in a lot of our interviews in the past, we've always recommended that they go in pairs and that somebody be the interviewer and somebody be the person who takes notes. If they're recording, they would only do it with consent of the interviewee. Maybe, and that's something that they're all taught in from our first year classes right up through everything else. So yeah, I think go ahead, Rick.
I'm sorry, Kris, please finish.
I know, I don't remember, but it wasn't anything important.
Well, there I go again. As I mentioned, for the third year project, the students have to complete some training in the social sciences. And a lot of those projects, interviews are the primary data collection method. And so the students have to learn an awful lot about the design, conduct, and analysis of interviews before they go out into the community to have those interviews. And they have to get IRB approval for that work, because it's human subjects research that's going to be published.
And then the last question that we have here, are you requiring online work periods of class in person, and are the classes synchronous or asynchronous?
We have our classes mostly right now are hybrid. So we've got some people in the classroom and some people out of the classroom. A lot of faculty have made the synchronous parts optional. Many of them are recorded so that students can pick up stuff later. For any kind of project work, I think people are really trying very hard to put students in project teams who have time that they can get together via Zoom or whatever outside of class. But also, since we know that students will have the class time available, I mean, depending on where they are in the world, there's a lot of in-class time also used for project teams to accomplish their work.
All right, well, that looks like that concludes all the questions that we have in the chat. I just want to say thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and I know people are very interested in this topic, and I do have to laugh because the Hollywood movie star just there, she's showing her presence right there. There she is. Rick's very famous cat Roxy, who loves to get in the camera. So I'm laughing because she's made her presence again, Rick. But again, we want to say thank you so much. You both have been wonderful. The work that you're doing at WPI is just absolutely amazing. And I know that there's a lot of interest here just based on the questions. And I know next hour, and I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot of emails as well. So again, thank you so very, very much for joining us this day today. And so for those of you who have done this before, you know the next phase is that we're moving into the workshop. But before we do that, I also want to make just a shout out here. As you know, we're going to be doing 2 deep dives. And so one deep dive will be with Don Whitehead looking at integrative learning, and the other will be a deeper dive into project-based learning with Kris Wobbe. And that's both of those are going to be in November, I apologize. So we'll talk more about those specific dates at the end of next hour. But again, you'll want to mark your calendars, because if you're interested in project-based learning, Kris's workshop will give you an even deeper dive into this. Thank you very, very much.